We celebrated earlier this week the 100th anniversary of the International Women's Day. It used to be called the International Working Women's Day, but they decided that was redundant. So they shortened the title. We've come a long way in the 100 years since that was a day recognized all across the United States and the world. But we've got a long way to go. Women today do 2/3 of the work in the world, produce half of its food, yet earn 10% of its income and own 1% of its property. The first person that I ever heard articulate this so clearly was Hillary Clinton. As First Lady, she had just returned from India and was speaking in Chicago. And she spoke about her observations, which if you see the latest Newsweek, is a cover story. Hillary Clinton's role in elevating women around the world. And she said something I've never forgotten. If you go to a foreign country that faces so many different challenges and problems, and you can only ask one question and really conclude as to whether they have a chance, the question's this: how do you treat your women? If they're treated like property and slaves, the likelihood of that country's success is limited. One of the big challenges today in Egypt: will they finally bring women into the government of Egypt? The women are in the streets, risking their lives, literally risking their lives, to be part of the demonstrations to overturn the governments in many of these Arab lands. And the question is, at the end of the day, will they be part of the leadership of these countries? If they are, you can bet those countries are more likely to move toward values that we share. They're more likely to be just and democratic and representative in the way that they work. That's a great credit not only to women, but also to the determination which you all have. I know it in my family. Determination to make sure that there is a just and fair result. I've traveled around the world looking at programs. The most inspiring programs involve women. Micro-lending. I went to Uganda, and they had a special meeting for me in a village, but they didn't have a place to meet, and so they made one. They took a chicken coop. There were 2 of them right next to one another, and they cleaned the chicken coop out so that we could meet, about 12 of us. They jammed all the chickens in the other coop, and they weren't happy about it. So they were making a lot of noise, but they scrubbed it down. They did an extraordinary thing, just so we could meet. And we talked about microcredit, and the women who were gathered there, who did not speak English, talked about what small loans meant to their lives. And one woman said, "My knees have gone soft." And I said, "What does that mean?" Said, "I used to have to crawl on my knees to beg my husband for money to feed the children. I don't have to crawl on my knees anymore. My knees have gone soft. I buy things and take them to the market, I sell it, and I have the money to feed my children." I think you know, as I do too, that educating girls, young women around the world is one of the most revolutionary things that you can do. It delays that early marriage, it delays and sometimes reduces the number of children. It increases the likelihood that they're going to end up in a position in life where they can sustain their own lives and help others. In a developing world, 1 woman dies every minute during pregnancy or childbirth. I went to Tanzania with Kara. I was with Senator Sherrod Brown and his wife Connie Schultz. It was Connie's first trip to Africa. Sherrod had been there. And we left and went way out in the country and went to this clinic, which Kara helps. And by our standards, primitive. By their standards, magnificent. And they showed me their pride and joy, a bicycle ambulance. It was a tricycle that had a platform on the back. And they said if a woman came and presented herself in labor at this clinic and needed to be moved to the hospital, this was the ambulance to take her. The ambulance. I said, "How long is the trip?" They said, "Only several hours on bumpy roads." Can you imagine? But to them, it was a breakthrough. Babies will be saved and lives will be saved, and thank you, CARE, for making that happen and for helping people around the world, particularly mothers who are just struggling to bring children into this world in a safe and healthy way. I just finished up a couple months ago serving on the President's Deficit Commission. It was depressing. The reality is this: we borrow 40 cents for every dollar we spend in America today. It is unsustainable. We borrowed from China and Saudi Arabia, and they've begun to question whether we're ever going to get our house in order here. And so we went to the American people and said, what do you think we should do about our national debt? And the American people said, cut spending. It's pretty clear, cut spending. Okay, where should we cut? Well, don't cut Social Security, okay? And don't cut Medicare, okay? And don't cut veterans programs, all right? And don't cut education, okay? What should we cut? Foreign aid. We ought to cut foreign aid. So we said to the people in this national poll, what percentage of the federal budget do you believe is foreign aid? They said 27% of the federal budget. It's less than 2%. They wanted us to cut it down to 13%. So understand the challenges we face. As we deal with the deficit and deal with spending, we've got to take care that we don't cut the programs that count. Let me give you an example. The House budget that just passed 2 weeks ago made some terrible cuts. Cuts that, if we're out for bragging rights about how much we can cut in the next 6 months, maybe you can justify them. But if you want to do something that's thoughtful and something that does the least harm to the most vulnerable, you wouldn't do this. To think that we would take 1 million people around the world off of antiretroviral therapy, people who are already HIV positive and have AIDS, we have just consigned most of them to a death sentence. Now, the new leader in England, in the United Kingdom, is going through similar problems. But he said something interesting. He said, we are not going to cut foreign aid. He said, I am not going to make cuts that cost lives. Shouldn't that be our standard too? We are not going to make cuts that cost lives. Raj Shah, what an amazing man. How old is this man? I mean, he's got to be in his mid-30s or something. How much? 37. Yes, I didn't see you sitting there. How are you doing? Good. I'm glad you're here for Source of Information. Thank you. So he's a medical doctor, and he's worked with Bill Gates, and now he's heading up USAID. And he said, these cuts, I want to tell you what they mean. It isn't just cutting off antiretroviral therapy. He said, we are so close in developing vaccines and medical research that will transform the third world. He said that we are within a few years of developing an effective malaria vaccine. Do you know what that means? If it isn't the #1 killer of children in the poorest countries on earth, it's pretty close. And that we could develop this would be as transformative as a polio vaccine, maybe more so. Are we going to cut that off at this point? Whether it's medical research for the United States or for the world to find these cures, we cannot stop. Cuts can be made in other places, and taxes can be imposed on people who can afford to pay them. We've got to make sure that this is a shared sacrifice. I came to this business after a pretty rocky start. I lost 3 elections before I ever won one. And you think to yourself, what in the heck is going through your head? My wife said, you get one more chance, and thank goodness I won. And I got elected to the House of Representatives, and the reason I kept coming back and trying again was because I had a fella who would pick me up out of the dust after an election defeat, dust me off, and say, you'll get him next time. And his name was Paul Simon. Paul Simon, who was a senator from Illinois, was such a genuinely good person, but a visionary person. 27 years ago, he wrote a book called Tapped Out. Tapped Out said, the wars of the 21st century will be over water. And I'm afraid he may turn out to be right, because as we see and look at this world, we can find countries that are struggling with water every single day. If you've been to or seen a developing country, you know what the quest for daily water does to a family. It takes the girl who should be in school and sends her on a long trek to pick up water and carry it back to the village. And many times she's carrying back contaminated water that will just make everyone sick. I, in Paul's name, introduced the Paul Simon Water for the World Act, and we passed it in the Senate with John Kerry's help and the help of a lot of Republicans, Senator Bob Corker and others who joined us, and sent it to the House of Representatives in plenty of time, and it died, unfortunately, after the election. We got to do this again. We have got to commit ourselves to developing safe water sources around the world. If America wants an image for the developing world, is there a better image you can think of than a nation that cares enough to change daily life so that families and villages are liberated from this battle to find water, and little girls get a chance to go to school instead of walking those dusty roads every single day? We're going to keep fighting on that. And Jody mentioned our efforts too when it comes to child marriage. This is an international scandal. What happens to these poor girls sold into marriage destroys their lives. Literally, they die, many of them in early childbirth. And those that don't die sometimes are maimed in the course of childbirth and deal with fistula and the problems that come with it. So that is well worth the effort as well. 6 years ago, with CARE support, Congress considered and the Senate eventually passed the Paul Simon Water for the Poor Act, and now the Paul Simon Water for the World Act needs your help too. I hope you will put that on the agenda. I'm going to reintroduce that bill next week. And I do want to close by saying this. In 1946, I was only 2 years old, so I don't have a memory of this. But I knew growing up what a care package was. A care package was more than just food and the basics. A care package was a message. It was a message from America to the world that we do care. And we care enough to send the basics and to continue to do it. You have carried on that tradition. I thank you so much for it. You have made this a better world, and you've made us prouder as Americans because you're willing to stand up for our place in that world. We need to do another miracle today, as we did back in the 1940s when we rescued Europe after the war. And I happen to be in a room full of miracle workers and proud to be with you. Thanks a lot.